"Clear your table and go home, woman. You're embarrassing yourself." The merchant said it loud enough for the whole market to hear. Loud enough for people to stop, turn and look. Loud enough for children to laugh without knowing why. Lillian Harper's hands did not shake. She placed the last jar of preserves on her blue cloth table with the deliberate calm of a woman who has already decided she is not leaving. 8 months she had stood in this exact spot while Silver Creek laughed. 8 months of empty hands and full determination. She didn't know that morning that a quiet stranger was about to change everything and that she was about to change him right back. Subscribe to our channel, follow this story to the very end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Silver Creek, Colorado had a particular talent for cruelty, not the violent kind. Not the kind that left marks you could point to in a courtroom. The cruelty of Silver Creek was the quiet, grinding, daily kind. The kind that arrived in sideways glances and unfinished sentences. The kind that made a person feel invisible, even when they were standing directly in front of you. Lillian Harper understood that cruelty the way a farmer understands drought. Not as a tragedy that arrived once and passed, but as a permanent condition of the land she had chosen to plant herself in. She had chosen it, though. She needed people to understand that. She had chosen Silver Creek on a cold Tuesday morning in the autumn of 1886, when she stepped off the supply wagon with 3 bags, a recipe box her mother had kept wrapped in oilcloth, and the specific kind of determination that only grows in a person who has already lost almost everything and decided to stop being afraid of losing the rest. She had not come to Silver Creek running from failure. She had come to Silver Creek running toward something. The distinction mattered to her, though she rarely bothered explaining it to anyone anymore. Because the people of Silver Creek had already decided what she was, and no amount of explanation was going to change that. What she was, according to the merchants who operated the market every Saturday morning, was a nuisance. What she was, according to the women who gathered at the dry goods store and lowered their voices when she walked past, was a cautionary tale. What she was, according to the man who rented her the small lot at the edge of the market for a price that was 10 cents too high, and came with a look that dared her to complain what she was. To him was temporary. Lillian had heard all of it. She had a talent for hearing things that weren't meant for her ears. Possibly because she had learned, in the first few weeks in Silver Creek, that if she only paid attention to what people said directly to her face, she would miss 90% of what was actually happening around her. The market opened at 7 in the morning. Lillian arrived at 6. Not because she needed the extra hour to set up. Her table didn't take more than 15 minutes to arrange. She arrived at 6 because arriving at 6 meant she was already settled, already composed, already occupying her space with calm authority, before anyone else showed up with opinions about whether she deserved to be there. It was a small strategy, but after 8 months in Silver Creek, Lillian had learned that survival was built almost entirely from small strategies. She spread her blue cloth across the wooden table. The cloth was faded now. She knew that. She had scrubbed it so many times that the original deep blue had softened into something closer to the color of a winter sky. But she liked it better that way, and she refused to replace it with something newer just to satisfy the aesthetic sensibilities of people who weren't buying from her anyway, and she began arranging her goods. 3 jars of blackberry preserves, 2 of apple butter, 1 of a summer berry blend she had been experimenting with for 3 weeks, adjusting the sugar ratio each time until she got the balance right. 6 loaves of bread, each wrapped carefully in clean cloth and tied with twine. 2 aprons, hand-sewn from fabric she had bought at a discount, because there was a small flaw in the weave that nobody would notice once the apron was actually being worn. A bundle of dried lavender, 4 small bags of mixed herbs, thyme, rosemary, sage measured out carefully and labeled in her handwriting. She stepped back and looked at the arrangement. She knew what it looked like. She wasn't deluding herself. Compared to the stall directly across from her, owned by Gerald Pittman, who had been selling at the Silver Creek Market for 11 years and had the kind of overflowing abundance that came from 11 years of accumulated connections and goodwill. Her table looked like a child's play effort. Gerald's stall had bolts of fabric stacked to eye level, barrels of grain and flour, smoked meats hanging from a crossbar, canned goods arranged in careful rows that went 4 deep. Gerald's stall smelled like commerce. It smelled like prosperity. Lillian's table smelled like bread and lavender. She told herself that was not nothing. She told herself that every single week, standing in front of that table before the market opened, because by the time the market was in full swing and the laughter started, she needed the words to already be somewhere inside her. Braced and ready. Look at that. Same table as last week. Same as 3 weeks ago. When is she going to figure out this isn't working? The voices came from somewhere to her left. She didn't turn to look. She was rearranging the herb bags, not because they needed rearranging, but because it gave her hands something to do and her face something to hide behind. I heard she's been baking since 4 in the morning. 4 in the morning for that. Someone should tell her. It would be a kindness, a pause, then a low laugh, the kind that carries further than it was intended to. Let her figure it out herself. She thinks she knows better than everyone else. So let her learn. Lillian placed the last herb bag down with great care. She thought, I have been up since 3:30, not 4. I know exactly how much flour I used and how much it cost and what each loaf needs to sell for to cover my expenses and leave enough for next week. I have calculated this down to the penny. I know exactly what I'm doing. And I know exactly how much farther I have to go, and I know I'm going to get there. She said nothing out loud. That was another small strategy. The list was growing. By 9 in the morning, the market was full. By 9:15, Lillian had sold 1 jar of preserves to a woman who seemed more interested in whether anyone was watching her than in the preserves themselves. By 9:30, a child had stopped to look at the aprons, and the child's mother had steered her away with the brisk efficiency of someone avoiding contamination. Lillian watched all of it. She watched the way Gerald Pittman caught her eye from across the market and shook his head. Slowly, with the specific expression of a man who is disappointed in you for failing to understand what he considers obvious. She watched the way 2 younger women, wives of men, who worked for one of the mining operations outside of town, whispered behind their hands and looked at her table, with expressions she had learned to interpret as pity mixed with entertainment. She watched the way old Reverend Hartley walked past without stopping, even though she had made him a jar of apple butter 3 weeks ago as a gift, and even though she had seen him eat half of it at the church social and say it was the best he'd had in years. None of this was new. All of it still stung, the way a healing wound stings when you press it, not as bad as the original injury, but a specific sharp reminder that it isn't fully healed yet. She was pouring herself a small cup of water from the tin she kept under the table when the first real confrontation of the morning arrived. Miss Harper. She knew the voice before she drained up. Victor Hale had a voice that was trained to take up space deep, deliberate, the kind of voice that had learned to be the loudest one in every room. Victor owned 3 stores in Silver Creek. He owned a significant portion of the main street. He had arrived in Silver Creek 4 years ago with a business partner, acquired everything worth acquiring with a combination of savvy, relentlessness, and methods that people whispered about but rarely confronted directly, and now operated in the town with the comfortable authority of a man who had made himself indispensable to enough people that almost nobody was willing to challenge him openly. He was not tall, which surprised people who had only heard his voice before seeing him. He compensated with presence, the kind that came from years of practice in making everyone around him feel slightly smaller than they actually were. Mr. Hale, Lillian said. She kept her voice level. This was not easy. It required the same internal architecture as standing in front of the table at 6 in the morning and telling herself she deserved to be there. I wanted to stop by and see how things were going. He looked at her table. He looked at it for a long time, the way a person looks at something when they want you to understand that they're looking, and that what they see confirms everything they already thought. I see. It's a slow morning, Lillian said. It's been a slow 8 months, Victor said. She didn't answer that. I have a proposition for you, he said. One I think you should hear. I'm working. He looked at the table again. And this time, the look did what it was designed to do. It made her feel the gap between what the word working was supposed to mean and what was actually in front of them. She felt it, and she hated feeling it, and she hated that he could make her feel it with nothing but a glance. I'm in the market to expand my dry goods operation, Victor said. The space next to my main store on Birch Street just became available. I've been thinking about what to put there. He tilted his head, as though the idea were only just occurring to him, which she didn't believe for a second. Jams, preserves, baked goods perhaps. There's a market for it, I think, if it's done with proper capital and proper presentation. That's a fine idea, Lillian said carefully. I thought you might say so. He smiled. Here's what I'm proposing. You come work for me. You bring your recipes, your production process, whatever it is you're doing out here. I provide the space, the capital, the customer base. We split the profit. I take 60. You take 40. Lillian looked at him. She kept her face very still, because she understood that her face was the only territory she had complete control over in this moment, and she was not going to surrender it. And the credit, she asked. I'm sorry? Who gets the credit? Who does the customer think they're buying from? P smiled again. Hale's Provisions, obviously. I see. She straightened a jar that didn't need straightening. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Hale. I'll need to think about it. Don't think too long, he said. The space won't wait. He walked away with the unhurried ease of a man who already knew how the story ended. Lillian looked at the blue cloth on her table. She thought, he doesn't want my recipes. He wants me to disappear quietly into something he owns, so that nobody has to look at this table anymore, and he gets to profit from eliminating an inconvenience. She thought no. She thought, absolutely not. She straightened her spine and waited for the next customer. The next customer was not a customer at all. He came from the east end of the market, where the supply wagons came in. And he moved with the particular economy of motion that belongs to men who have spent years covering long distances on horseback, nothing wasted, nothing performed, just a body that knew exactly how to take itself from one point to another without asking for attention along the way. He was somewhere in his late 30s, sun-darkened skin, a jaw that suggested a strong opinion on subjects he didn't often bother to verbalize. His coat was clean but worn at the elbows. His hat was pulled low against the morning light. He stopped in front of her table. He didn't look at her the way Victor had looked at the table. He looked at the actual things on the table. He looked at each item with the attentive, practical consideration of someone who is genuinely assessing whether it serves a purpose he has. Are those preserves, he asked. His voice was quiet. Not performing anything. Yes, Lillian. Blackberry, apple butter, and a summer berry blend. What's in the summer berry blend? She blinked. Nobody had ever asked her that. Strawberries and raspberries. Mostly. Some currants for tartness. I've been adjusting the sugar this season. Last year it was too sweet. I think. This batch has a little more balance. He picked up the jar and looked at it with the same level attention. You made this yourself. Everything on this table, she said. The bread, the aprons, the herb bundles, all of it. He nodded slowly, like a man filing information away. How much? She told him. He didn't flinch at the price, didn't try to negotiate it down, didn't make any of the small signals she had learned to read that meant a person was trying to find a way out of paying what she asked. He reached into his coat. I'll take 2 blackberry and the summer berry, he said. And 2 loaves of bread. Lillian began wrapping the bread. Her hands were steady. She was determined to keep them steady. You're new, she said before she could stop herself. I don't think I've seen you at the market before. I come in for supplies every few weeks, he said. I run a spread about 12 miles east. Usually stick to the supply wagons. He paused. I don't generally come to this end of the market. What brought you here today? He looked at her for a moment before answering. And the look was direct without being unkind. It reminded her of the way her father used to look at things he was trying to understand rather than judge. "I heard the laughing," he said simply. "Wanted to see what it was about." Lillian's hands stilled on the bread wrapping. "And," she said, "and I couldn't figure out what was funny." He picked up the jars she had set aside for him. "Your table looks like it has exactly what a person needs on it." "I don't see the joke." He paid her. He counted the coins out carefully. And she noticed, because she noticed everything, that he gave her an extra dime without making any comment about it, without looking at her to see if she understood what he was doing, as though the extra dime were simply the correct amount, and he didn't feel the need to explain his arithmetic. "Thank you," she said. "Caleb Morgan," he said. It wasn't quite an introduction, he said it, the way a person states a practical fact, like the name of a road or a direction of wind. "In case you need to know who's coming back next week." He picked up his purchases and walked away. Lillian stood at her table. Around her the market continued its noise. Gerald Pittman was laughing at something with a customer. Two boys were chasing each other between the stalls. The autumn sun was climbing higher, and the day was warming up, and everything was exactly as it had been 20 minutes ago. Except something had shifted. She put her hand on the blue cloth and felt the worn softness of it under her palm. She thought, "He's coming back next week." She thought, "That is one person who is coming back." She thought, "One is enough to start with." He did come back. The following Saturday, Caleb Morgan appeared at her table at 10 minutes past 8, not at the opening of the market. Not with any drama, just arriving when he arrived. The way a man arrives at a place he has decided to go. He bought a jar of apple butter and another loaf of bread. He asked, while she wrapped it, whether she was planning any new preserves for the following week. "I've been thinking about a late-season plum," she said. "I found some good ones at a farm about 3 miles out. If the price is right, I could have a batch ready by next Saturday." "That sounds worthwhile," he said. She noticed he didn't say "sounds good" in the vague, social way that people said "sounds good" when they were trying to end a conversation. He said it like a man making a mental note. He bought the plum preserves the following week. And the week after that, he arrived with a question she wasn't expecting. "I've got 6 empty mason jars at the ranch," he said. "No use to me. Could you use them?" She looked at him. Empty jars were not a trivial thing. Glass jars cost money. And her operation was limited at every point by the things that cost money: the sugar, the fruit, the fuel, the cloth, the jars. Every jar she didn't have to buy was one more batch she could make, without eating into the thin margin she was trying to protect. "I could absolutely use them," she said. "I'll bring them next week," he said. "No charge. They're just taking up space." She didn't say thank you in the fluttering, overwhelmed way that she had trained herself to avoid. Because she had understood it even before she was sure he intended it, that he wasn't offering the jars as charity. He was offering them as the practical transaction of a man who had something he didn't need and knew someone who could use it. The dignity of the exchange was in treating it like the simple thing it was. "I appreciate that," she said. He nodded. That was enough for both of them. The jars arrived, and then 2 weeks later, he arrived with a question that was somewhat more complicated. "I had some men come through the ranch last week," he said. "They were asking about provisions, cowhands moving between operations. They're going to need supplies for the trail, preserved food, things that keep." He looked at her table. "I told them I knew someone." Lillian went very still. "You told them about my stall?" "I told them about a woman who makes good preserves and knows what she's doing," he said. "Whether they come is up to them. But I thought you should know you might have some different customers in the next few weeks." The cowhands came. Not all of them, not immediately, but 3 of them appeared the following Saturday, big, weather-beaten men who moved through the market with the specific discomfort of people not entirely at ease with large, public social situations, and they bought everything Lillian had in the way of preserved goods. They didn't linger, they didn't chat, they paid what she asked without argument, and they disappeared back toward the supply wagons. Gerald Pittman watched it happen, with an expressions that moved through surprise and settled somewhere in the vicinity of calculation. Lillian noticed. She noticed everything. What she was building was still small. Anyone looking at it from the outside would have said it was fragile, precarious, nowhere near secure, and they would have been right. She knew that better than anyone, but it was growing. Quietly, steadily, in the way things grow when they're built correctly, not from a burst of energy or a moment of luck, but from a series of small correct decisions, made one after another, each one opening the door to the next. She was thinking about what the next correct decision was when Caleb arrived at her table on a Saturday morning 6 weeks after their first conversation and said, "Without preamble, I need to tell you something, and I want you to hear it as information, not as an opinion about your business." Lillian put down the bread she was wrapping. "All right, I was at the saloon last night," he said. "Not something I do often, but a man I've worked with invited me. And I went." He paused. Victor Hale was there. He was talking to a man named Aldridge. He's the county records clerk. Deals with property documents, debt filings, that sort of thing. Lillian felt something tighten in her chest. "And," she said. "I wasn't trying to listen," Caleb said. "But Hale's voice carries when he's had a drink." And what he was saying, he stopped. Started again. "He was talking about your father's name. Miss Harper." The tightening became a cold band across her ribcage. "What did he say?" "He said there was an old debt attached to your family name. A property claim from before you came to Silver Creek. He said it was enough to cover what you owe on your market lot, and then some." Caleb looked at her directly. He seemed very certain about it. Lillian held herself very still. She knew about the debt. Or she thought she knew. She knew there had been a creditor, a man her father had borrowed from, in the difficult years before his death, and she knew the account had been messy and poorly documented. She had tried to trace it before leaving her old home, and the numbers hadn't added up, and she hadn't had the money or the resources to press the question, and she had decided, she had told herself, and she believed it, that it was settled. "He seemed certain," she repeated. "Yes. Did he say anything else?" "He said he was going to give you a little more time." Caleb's voice was careful. The way he said it, it wasn't a kindness. It was more like he was waiting for something. Like he wanted you to build a little more before he took it. The market was loud around them. Someone was arguing about the price of grain 2 stalls over. A dog was barking somewhere near the well. The autumn sun was the same as it had been every week, and the blue cloth was the same, and her jars were lined up in the same careful order. Lillian breathed in and breathed out. She thought, "He wants me to get big enough to be worth taking," she thought. "He was never going to let me succeed here. He was waiting for the right moment to dismantle it." She thought, "I need to know exactly what that debt says. Every word of it, every number." "Thank you for telling me," she said to Caleb. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find out what's real and what isn't," she said. "And then I'm going to decide what to do about it." He looked at her for a moment. "Do you have anyone who can help you look through documents? Someone who knows how those records work?" "No. I know someone," he said. "A man named Patterson who does legal work out of Glenwood Springs. He comes through this way twice a month. I could ask him to look at whatever you can find." Lillian looked at Caleb Morgan. She had been in Silver Creek for 8 months. In those 8 months, she had learned to read people with the efficiency that comes from necessity, not as a skill she was proud of, but as a survival mechanism, the way a person learns to read weather when they can't afford to be caught unprepared. She had learned to recognize condescension disguised as helpfulness, charity offered as a form of control, kindness used as currency to purchase obligation. What she saw in Caleb Morgan was none of those things. She saw a man who had information that was useful to her, and who was offering it in the most direct way possible, and who was waiting for her response without any visible investment in which response she chose. "Yes," she said. "I would be grateful if you'd ask him." He nodded. "I'll write to him today. He paid for his bread and his preserves, and he left." Lillian turned back to her table. A woman from the east side of town had stopped to look at the aprons, and Lillian moved toward her with the steady ease she had spent months constructing. The ease that said, "I belong here. I know what I'm doing. This table is exactly where it's supposed to be." Because it was. And because whatever Victor Hale was planning, he had made one fundamental miscalculation. He had started this when Lillian Harper was frightened and isolated and still believed, at some level, what the people of Silver Creek said about her. He was finishing it, if he thought he was finishing it, when she was something else entirely. She was a woman who had 6 regular customers, 12 mason jars she hadn't had to buy, a legal contact in Glenwood Springs, and a clear, cold, furious understanding of exactly what was being done to her and exactly what she intended to do about it. The woman bought an apron. Lillian wrapped it carefully and said thank you, and meant it. And somewhere in the back of her mind, behind the courtesy and the composure and the careful arithmetic of survival, she was already thinking about the records, about the numbers that hadn't added up, about what the truth was going to look like when she finally found it. She was going to find it. She was going to find every last piece of it. And then the town of Silver Creek was going to have to find something else to laugh about. Patterson arrived on a Thursday. Lillian knew he was coming because Caleb had sent word, through one of the cowhands who passed by the market midweek, a folded note. No envelope, just a scrap of paper with 3 lines written in a hand that was economical and legible and completely without flourish. Patterson will be in Silver Creek Thursday afternoon. He's agreed to look at whatever documents you have. Bring everything. She had spent the 3 days between Saturday and Thursday pulling together everything she owned that had a number on it. The rental agreement for her market lot. The receipt from her first month's payment. The letter from the creditor's representative that had arrived 2 years ago, before her father died, and that she had read so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. The account ledger she had kept since arriving in Silver Creek, every purchase, every sale, every expense recorded in her own hand, because she had understood from the beginning that the only record she could trust completely was the one she kept herself. She spread everything on her kitchen table before and looked at it. It wasn't much, but it was hers and it was accurate. And accuracy was going to have to be enough. Patterson turned out to be a compact, gray-haired man in his 50s who had the manner of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people lied to him and had long since stopped being surprised by it. He shook Lillian's hand when Caleb introduced them, looked at her with the direct appraisal of a man calibrating what he was dealing with, and said, "Show me what you have." They sat at the same table where she had spread her documents the night before. Caleb took a chair by the wall and said nothing, which was. Lillian was beginning to understand. His particular form of consideration, he took up space without demanding attention, present without being intrusive, which was a rarer quality in a person than it should have been. Patterson read everything slowly. He asked 2 questions during the reading. What county was the original creditor in, and did she have any documentation of payments made against the debt before her father's death? She answered both. He nodded and kept reading. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at her across the table. "The original debt is real," he said. "Your father borrowed money." "That's not in dispute, I know," Lillian said. "I've never disputed that part." "The amount listed in the notice you received is not real," Patterson said. "Someone has added fees to this account that are not supported by the original lending agreement. Compounding interest at a rate that wasn't in the contract. Administrative charges that don't correspond to any legitimate category I've ever seen in a debt record." He tapped the letter from the creditor's representative. "Whoever is managing this account has inflated the outstanding balance by approximately 60% over the actual remaining principal." The room was very quiet. Lillian heard Caleb shift in his chair by the wall. "Can you prove that?" she asked. "With access to the original lending records from the county where the debt was registered?" "Yes," Patterson said. "It would take time. I'd need to write to the county clerk. Request the documentation. It might take 3 or 4 weeks. "Do it," Lillian said. Patterson looked at her. "Miss Harper, I want to be direct with you. Even if we establish that the balance is inflated, That doesn't make the original debt disappear. There's still money owed. And if someone is already positioning to use this debt against you, then I need to know exactly how much I actually owe, she said. Not what they're claiming I owe, what I actually owe. Because I'm not going to lose everything I've built over a number that someone made up. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right." He looked at Caleb. Something passed between the two men, some quick, private communication of the kind that happens between people who have known each other long enough to talk without words. Then Patterson looked back at Lillian. "I'll write the letters today," he said. "I'll let Mr. Morgan know when I have something." After he left, Caleb stayed. Lillian stood at her kitchen table, looking at the documents she was putting back into order, straightening them with more precision than was necessary, because her hands needed something to do, and she wasn't ready yet to look directly at what she was feeling. "You knew," she said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just the thing that needed to be said." "I suspected," Caleb said. The way Hale was talking, it didn't sound like a man who had found a legitimate debt. It sounded like a man who had found a tool. "He's been waiting since I arrived," she said. "He offered me that position in his store 3 months ago. Work for him, hand over everything I'd built, disappear into his operation quietly. I said no, and he decided to find another way." "What are you going to do in the meantime?" Caleb asked. 3 or 4 weeks is time he could use. Lillian finally looked up from the documents. "I'm going to sell more preserves," she said. "I'm going to get to the market earlier than I already do. I'm going to make sure every person in Silver Creek who might consider buying from me has a reason to do it before Victor Hale gets the chance to tell them something that turns them away." Caleb looked at her with that level, appraising look. She was getting used to the look that was not judgment, not pity, not admiration, just a man genuinely paying attention to what was in front of him. "I have a barn roof that needs patching before winter," he said. "I was planning to hire 2 men from town to do it. I'll be purchasing supplies from someone. Might as well be you." Lillian understood what he was doing. She understood it completely, and she was not going to waste both of their time by pretending she didn't. "What do you need?" she said. He gave her a list. It was a real list: nails, roofing material, a specific type of sealant she would need to source from the hardware store. She wrote it down and told him she could have it together by the end of the week. He said that worked. He stood to leave Mr. Morgan, she said. He turned. "Why are you doing this?" She said it plainly, without any particular weight or implication, because she genuinely needed to know. Not to decide whether to trust him, she had already made that decision. For reasons she could articulate clearly to herself, but because she had a policy, developed through necessity, of not accepting help whose motivation she didn't understand. Understanding what something cost, even kindness, even genuine kindness, was how she kept herself from being surprised by the bill later. He was quiet for a moment. "When I came to Silver Creek 8 years ago," he said, "I had just lost my wife Clara. She'd been sick for 2 years. And when she died, I didn't know what to do with myself. I bought the ranch because I needed something to do with my hands. Something that would still be there when I got up in the morning." He paused. "I know what it looks like when a person is building something out of what's left. I recognize it. And I know what it looks like when other people treat it like it's worth nothing." He picked up his hat. "Your table is worth something, Miss Harper. So is what's on it. I'm not doing anything extraordinary. I'm just doing what someone should have done 6 months ago." He left. Lillian stood in the quiet of her kitchen. She put her hand flat on the table where the documents were stacked. She thought, Clara. He had a wife named Clara, and she died. And he's been alone for 8 years, and he came to Silver Creek to give himself something to do with his hands. She thought, that is the loneliest thing I have heard in a very long time. She thought, get back to work. She got back to work. The following Saturday's market was different in a way that was hard to name, but impossible to miss. The difference was not in the volume of customers. She still wasn't Gerald Pittman. She wasn't going to be Gerald Pittman in 3 weeks, but in the quality of attention. People stopped at her table who had not stopped before. Not the cowhands, though 2 of them came again. Regular townspeople. A woman named Margaret Ells, who ran the boarding house on the north end of town and who Lillian had seen at the market a dozen times without ever speaking to. A man named Darrow, who worked at the post office and who bought a bundle of dried herbs and said his wife had been asking where she could get more. A young woman, barely 20, who stood at the table for a long time looking at the aprons with an expression Lillian recognized as the calculation of someone who wants something and is trying to decide if they can justify it. The blue one, Lillian said quietly. It's well made. It'll last you. The young woman looked up, startled at being addressed. Then she looked at the apron, then back at Lillian. How much? Lillian told her. The young woman bought it. She walked away, holding it carefully, like something she was glad to have. Victor Hale did not come to the market that Saturday. But his absence had its own kind of presence, she noticed it. And she knew, with the instinct she had been sharpening for months, that his absence was not a retreat. It was preparation. She was proven right 4 days later. Margaret Ells came to her door on a Wednesday evening. Lillian answered the knock to find the boarding house owner standing in her doorway with an expression that mixed discomfort with something that looked like it was working hard to become courage. I'm sorry to come by unannounced, Margaret said. Come in, Lillian said. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Patterson had read the documents, where Lillian had spent so many late evenings doing her arithmetic by lamplight. Margaret sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the table surface for a moment before looking up. I heard something yesterday, she said, at the dry goods store. I wasn't trying to listen, but Victor Hale was there. And he was talking to the Aldridge woman, the county clerk's wife, and he was saying she stopped. Pressed her lips together. Tried again. He was saying that you've been running your operation on a fraudulent basis. That there's a debt attached to your name that you've been concealing. Lillian's breath came slow and even. He used that word? Fraudulent? Yes. He said I'd been concealing it. He said you'd come to Silver Creek knowing you owed money elsewhere, and that you'd deliberately set up here to avoid it. Margaret's voice was strained with the effort of repeating it. I don't believe it. I want you to know that. I'm telling you because you need to know what's being said. Not because I believe it. Lillian looked at Margaret Ells. She had not thought of this woman as an ally. She had not thought of her as anything in particular. She was part of the texture of the town. A face at the market, one of the 100 people who had been neutral in the way that neutrality can be its own kind of harm. He's moving faster than I thought, Lillian said. She said it quietly, almost to herself. What does that mean? Margaret asked. Lillian made a decision. She told Margaret about the debt. The real debt, the amount her father had actually borrowed. The payments that had been made. The way the number in the notice she'd received didn't match the original agreement. She told her about Patterson and the letters being written. She told her about the inflated fees. Margaret listened with the concentrated attention of a woman who ran a boarding house and understood. From long practice, what happened when you let problems fester unaddressed. When Lillian finished, Margaret sat very still for a moment. He knows you're looking into it, Margaret said. Yes. He must. And so he's getting ahead of it. He wants the town to believe the story he's telling before you can tell them what's actually true. Yes. Margaret was quiet. Then what do you need? Lillian blinked. She had not expected that question. She had expected sympathy, the complicated, slightly helpless sympathy of someone who feels bad about a situation they don't intend to get involved in. I need people to wait, Lillian said. Before they decide what they believe, I need them to wait 3 weeks. Patterson is requesting the original records. When they come back, the truth will be verifiable. Anyone who wants to can look at the actual numbers. Margaret stood up. I'll talk to Darrow, she said, at the post office. And Reverend Hartley. They have weight with people here. If they're willing to say publicly that they're waiting to hear both sides before forming an opinion, it changes things. Why would they do that? Lillian asked. The question came out more bluntly than she intended. But she needed the real answer. Margaret looked at her. Because Reverend Hartley ate half a jar of your apple butter at the church social and told 3 people it was the finest he'd had in years. And he's going to have to decide if he's the kind of man who lets Victor Hale take down the woman who made it without saying a word. She picked up her coat. And because Darrow's wife has been wearing your apron every day for 2 weeks, and she'll never forgive him if he doesn't. Lillian stood. Mrs. Ells, she said. Margaret paused at the door. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Margaret said. But she said it with something in her expression that was almost warm. Thank me when this is over. Lillian sat back down at her table after the door closed. She pulled her ledger toward her and opened it to the most recent page. The numbers were there, every transaction, every expense, every small increment of progress recorded in her careful, precise hand. She looked at them for a long time. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks before Patterson heard back from the county. 3 weeks during which Victor Hale was going to do everything he could to make the town of Silver Creek decide the story before the evidence arrived. She uncapped her pen. She began to plan. The next morning she was up before 4. She had a batch of plum preserves to finish, 3 loaves of bread to bake, and a list of things she needed to accomplish before Saturday that was longer than any she had made before. She worked through the list with the systematic focus of a woman who has learned that emotion is useful when it motivates and destructive when it controls, and that the difference between the two is whether you can still count while you're feeling it. She could count. She counted everything. When Saturday came, her table was the fullest it had ever been. She had made 2 extra batches of preserves, working late into the evenings twice that week, and she had pulled out 3 more aprons she had been saving. And she had added something new, small card, handwritten, placed in front of each item, describing what it was and how it was made and what it was for. Not elaborate cards, just clear, plain language. Blackberry preserves. Homemade, no additives. Good with biscuits or as a glaze. She had spent a full evening writing them, and she had done it because she understood, after 8 months, that what she had never done was introduce herself properly. She had placed things on a table and hoped people would see their value. She was done hoping. She was going to tell them. Gerald Pittman watched her table from across the market, with an expression that had evolved over the past few weeks, from amusement into something she couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it wasn't quite dismissal anymore either. Victor Hale arrived at 10. He didn't come to her table. He positioned himself at the edge of the market and spoke in a voice calibrated to carry to the 2 men from the mining operation he was standing with, to the women nearby, to anyone within range about the nature of honest commerce, about how a town the size of Silver Creek couldn't afford to let its market be used by people with murky backgrounds and unresolved legal situations, about how he wasn't naming any names, but people knew what he was talking about, and he thought it was worth raising before things went further. Lillian heard every word. She didn't move from behind her table. She had a customer, a man she didn't recognize, passing through town, who wanted 2 jars of preserves and was asking her about the herbs, and she gave him her complete, genuine attention because he was a real person who had come to her table with a real need, and because letting Victor Hale's voice pull her away from her own work was exactly what he was counting on. She sold the preserves. She answered the questions about the herbs. She wrapped everything carefully. When the customer left, Caleb Morgan was standing where he had been standing the first day she'd seen him, just off to one side, not announcing himself, having arrived at some point during the transaction, without making a production of it. "He's trying to do it today," Caleb said. It was barely above a quiet statement. "I know. Patterson sent word this morning," Caleb said. "The county responded faster than he expected. He should have the original documents by the end of next week. Maybe sooner." Lillian looked at Caleb. "End of next week," she said. "It's faster than 3 weeks. It's not fast enough if he convinces the market committee to pull my lot before then." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He can't do that without a formal complaint and a hearing. Can he file a formal complaint today?" A pause. "Yes," Caleb said, "he can." They looked at each other. Lillian thought, He's been planning this for longer than I thought. He's been waiting for the right accumulation of circumstances, enough people hearing his story, enough doubt, enough of a crowd to make the complaint look like community concern rather than personal vendetta. She thought, he doesn't know about Patterson. He doesn't know the records are coming. She thought, I have to buy one more week. If there's a hearing, she said to Caleb. Who decides it? The market committee, 3 men. Rollins, Bauer, and he stopped. And she said. And Victor Hale sits on the market committee, Caleb said flatly. The silence between them was the kind that lands like a weight. Of course he does, Lillian said. She reached under the table and picked up a jar of the plum preserves the batch she'd made on Tuesday. The one she was most satisfied with, the balance of sweet and tart, exactly where she'd been trying to get it for 2 weeks. She held it for a moment. Then she set it back down. Who are Rollins and Bauer, she said. Caleb thought. Rollins owns the feed store. He and Hale do business together sometimes. Bauer, he paused. Bauer runs the small dairy operation on the South Road. He's been having a hard year, lost a section of his herd to sickness in the spring. Lillian was very quiet. She thought about Bauer. She had never spoken to him. She knew the dairy because she had bought milk from his operation twice. And the quality was good. She knew it had been a hard year for dairy in this region because 2 other small operations had folded in the summer, and she had taken note because she took note of everything that was happening in the economic life of the town she was trying to survive in. Does Bauer know, she said carefully, that I've been thinking about whether there's a market for dairy goods at the Saturday market? Cream, butter, fresh cheese, that sort of thing. Goods that pair with preserves and bread. I was thinking about approaching a producer about a partnership. A formal one with shared booth space and shared customers. Caleb was very still. No, he said. He doesn't know that. Would it be appropriate for you to mention it to him? Before any committee hearing is called? Caleb looked at her for a long moment. That's not charity, he said. No, Lillian said. It's a business proposition, a real one. I've been thinking about it for 6 weeks. She met his gaze directly. It's also true that if Bauer has a stake in this table's continued operation, his vote on the committee becomes more complicated for Victor Hale to predict. Yes, Caleb said. It does. Then it would be worth having the conversation, Lillian said. He nodded once. I'll talk to him today. He left. Lillian turned back to her table. Victor Hale had moved to a different position in the market. He was talking to Rollins. Now she could see the 2 of them from the corner of her vision. Hale doing most of the talking, with the focused, purposeful energy of a man executing a plan. Rollins was nodding. She watched for exactly 5 seconds. Then she turned to the woman who had just stopped at her table. A woman she recognized as the wife of one of the post office men, who was looking at the handwritten cards with an expression of genuine interest. Can I tell you about the summer berry blend? Lillian said. The woman looked up. Please, she said. Lillian told her. And the whole time she talked about the strawberries, and the raspberries, and the sugar ratio, and the the currants, she was holding the plan in the back of her mind, like a second conversation, running parallel to the first. Bauer and his hard year, Patterson and his letters, Margaret and Reverend Hartley, Caleb and his quiet, steadfast presence, moving through the market with information and intention, and not one word wasted. She sold the summer berry blend. She sold 2 more loaves of bread. She sold the last of the herb bundles to a man who said his wife had been asking about them since the week before. By noon her table was half empty. By 2 o'clock, everything was gone. She stood at the blue cloth table with nothing left to sell. And she thought, this is what I'm building. This specific thing. These specific people who come back. This is real. And it is mine, and I am not going to let anyone take it. She folded the blue cloth with careful hands. The market was winding down around her. Stalls were being packed up. The light was going sideways and golden, the way it did in the late afternoon of a Colorado autumn. The air was cold at the edges now, carrying the first real suggestion of the winter that was coming. Victor Hale passed by without stopping. He glanced at her empty table. and she saw the calculation move across his face, not defeat. Nothing as clean as that, but a recalibration. The plan was still in motion. He was still certain he was going to win. He didn't know about Patterson. He didn't know about Bauer. He didn't know that Margaret Els had already spoken to Reverend Hartley, and that Reverend Hartley had already spoken to 2 other men, and that Darrow at the post office had said very clearly to his wife that he was not going to form an opinion about Lillian Harper based on anything Victor Hale said before he'd heard both sides. He didn't know any of it. He walked past her empty table like a man who has already won. And Lillian watched him go with the calm expression of a woman who has done her arithmetic and knows exactly what the numbers say. She picked up her empty basket. She walked home through the cooling afternoon. She had 7 days until Patterson's documents arrived. 7 days was enough. She was going to make it enough. The documents arrived on a Wednesday, not the following Wednesday, the way Patterson had estimated 5 days earlier than that, which meant they arrived on the same Wednesday that Victor Hale filed his formal complaint with the Market Committee. Lillian found out about both things within an hour of each other, and the hour in between was the longest she had spent since arriving in Silver Creek. Patterson's letter came to Caleb's ranch first, because that was the address Patterson had used, and Caleb rode into town the moment he read it. He found Lillian at her kitchen table, working through a new batch of preserves. She had been doing that every spare hour she had. Building inventory, building the kind of material evidence of a going concern that was harder to dismiss than a half-empty stall, and he put the letter on the table, in front of her, without preamble. She read it standing up, because she had been standing when he knocked, and she didn't think to sit down. Patterson's letter was precise and unambiguous, which was, she was learning, the only way Patterson communicated. The original lending agreement between her father and the creditor, which he had obtained certified copies of from the county recorder's office, showed a principal of $420 borrowed at 6% annual interest, with partial payments documented that reduced the remaining balance to approximately $190 at the time of her father's death. The notice she had received, the one Victor Hale had clearly obtained access to, or had a hand in generating, claimed a balance of $480. The discrepancy came from fees and compounding interest rates that appeared nowhere in the original agreement. Patterson's letter used the word fabricated. He underlined it. Lillian set the letter down. She breathed. He forged it, she said. Not a question. Patterson is careful with language, Caleb said. He used fabricated, not forged. But the practical meaning is the same. Can he prove it? He says he can demonstrate the discrepancy in front of any judge or committee with the original documents as reference. Caleb paused. He's coming to Silver Creek on Friday. That's 2 days from now. Yes. Lillian picked up the letter again. Read the specific numbers a second time. Put it down again. What's the second thing? She said. Caleb looked at her. You have 2 things to tell me, she said. You came in with that look on your face. That means there's something else. He was quiet for a beat, and she watched him decide how to say it. Hale filed a formal complaint with the market committee this morning, he said. I heard it from Rollins' clerk on my way through town. The hearing is set for Friday afternoon, 2 o'clock. Lillian did the arithmetic without thinking about it. Patterson was arriving Friday. He hadn't said what time. The hearing was at 2. Do you know when Patterson is getting in? She asked. The morning stage, Caleb said. Should be in by 10. 4 hours. Between Patterson's arrival and the hearing, she had 4 hours. Then we have what we need, she said. Lillian, he stopped. It was the first time he had used her given name, and she noticed it. And she thought he noticed that she noticed, because he continued without pausing to address it. Hale sits on that committee. He gets a vote on his own complaint. And Rollins is in his pocket, even with Patterson's documents. That's 2 votes against you before you say a word. Bauer is the 3rd vote, she said. Bauer said yes to the partnership discussion, Caleb said. But saying yes to a business conversation is different from voting against Hale in a public committee hearing. Bauer's operation is small. He does business with Hale's store. I don't know how far his yes goes when Hale is sitting across the table looking at him. Lillian was quiet. She knew he was right. She had thought about this. She had spent 3 evenings thinking about very little else, and she knew that Bauer was the variable she couldn't control. A man with a struggling operation and debt of his own, sitting on a committee with Victor Hale, was a man under a kind of pressure that no business proposition from Lillian Harper, however genuinely beneficial, could fully counteract. She needed something else. "Reverend Hartley," she said. "Can he come to the hearing?" Anyone can come to a market committee hearing. They're open. Can he speak if he's recognized? Hale will be running the meeting, which means he controls who speaks and when. He can't prevent a reverend from speaking, without looking like he's preventing a reverend from speaking, Lillian said. Which he won't do. Not in public. Considered this. No, he won't. And Margaret said Hartley was willing to stand behind this. She did. Lillian looked at her preserves lined up on the counter. The plum batch, the blackberry, the apple butter, the summer berry blend with the sugar ratio she hadn't gotten exactly right. She had made enough this week to fill twice her usual table, because she had understood, without letting herself fully articulate it until now, that this week was the week everything was going to be decided, one way or the other. And she wanted to be standing in front of something real and substantial when it was. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said. Caleb waited. She had been turning this over for 2 days. She hadn't told anyone, not Patterson, not Margaret, not even in a letter to the only cousin she kept occasional contact with. She had kept it because she wasn't sure what it meant, and she had a firm policy developed from painful experience of not saying things she wasn't sure about to people whose opinion of her mattered. Caleb Morgan's opinion of her mattered. She had accepted that fact quietly and without drama, the same way she accepted most facts as a piece of the real landscape she was navigating. "The morning Hale came to my table and offered me the position in his store," she said. "The morning he made the offer, I thought it was because he saw an opportunity. I thought he wanted cheap labor and my recipes, and the advantage of eliminating a small competitor. That's what I thought too," Caleb said. "It's not the whole story," she said. "I went back through it. I've been going back through it, and I think he knew about the debt before that morning. I think he had already found the account, already seen what was in it, or had someone adjust what was in it. Before he came to me with the offer." She paused. "The offer wasn't just about my business. It was a test. He wanted to see if I would fold quietly. If he gave me an easy way out, take the position, disappear into his operation, go away without making noise, he thought I might take it." Caleb was very still. "And when you didn't," he said. "When I didn't, I decided to use the harder method." She said it flatly, without the heat she had felt when the realization first came to her. "He's been building this since last spring. The offer, then the waiting, then the whispers in the dry goods store, then the formal complaint. It's been methodical. He does this. I think he has done this before. I think this is how he acquires things. He gives people a door, and if they don't walk through it, he builds a wall." Caleb was quiet for a long time. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then there are other people in this town who know what he does. People he's done it to before." Lillian met his eyes. "That's what I've been thinking. If we could find even one of them," Caleb said. "Someone willing to say, in a public hearing, that this is a pattern." "Do you know anyone?" she asked. He thought. She watched him, think she had learned to read the quality of his silences. The difference between the silence of a man who didn't know something and the silence of a man who was going through what he knew carefully before he spoke. This was the second kind. "There was a woman," he said slowly. "About 3 years ago. She had a small millinery operation, hats, ribbons, that sort of thing. She was doing well. Then there was some dispute about her lease, and she closed up and left. I don't know the details." He paused. "Hale's main store moved into that space about 2 months after she left. Do you know where she went?" "Which Glenwood Spring?" "I think. I'd have to ask." "Ask Patterson," Lillian said immediately. "He works out of Glenwood Springs. If she's there, he might know of her." Caleb straightened. I'll wire him today." He left with the purpose of a man who has been given a clear direction, which was, she had learned, the state in which Caleb Morgan was most himself, not giving direction, not demanding attention, but moving efficiently toward a specific target with every resource he had available. She stood at her kitchen table for a moment after he was gone. Then she picked up her stirring spoon and went back to the preserves. She had work to do, and panic was not on the schedule. The next day, Thursday, one day before the hearing, was when everything accelerated. Margaret came by in the morning with Reverend Hartley, who was a tall, slightly stooped man in his 60s, who had the complexion of someone who had spent 50 years caring about people and the weathered look of someone for whom that had been, at times, genuinely costly. He sat at Lillian's kitchen table. Everyone came to Lillian's kitchen table now. It seemed the small room had become a kind of informal headquarters for a campaign she hadn't planned to run, and he put his hands flat on the surface and said, "Tell me everything." She told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which was a quality she valued almost as much as competence. When she finished, he sat with his still on the table and looked at the specific middle distance that meant he was deciding something. "I'll be at the hearing," he said. "I'll speak. You don't need to ask me twice. Thank you." "Reverend, don't thank me yet," he said, which was exactly what Margaret had said. And Lillian wondered briefly whether the residents of Silver Creek had a shared agreement about the conditions of gratitude. "Hale has been a contributor to the church building fund. He's going to feel that I've betrayed him. Will that change your mind?" He looked at her with an expression that had a small, dry edge to it. "Young woman, I have been a reverend for 31 years. If I let every contributor to the building fund determine what I say from the pulpit, this town would have a very comfortable building and a very empty gospel." He stood up. "I'll be there at 2 o'clock. After Hartley left, Caleb arrived. He had a wire in his hand. "Patterson found her," he said. Lillian went still. "Her name is Ellen Marsh," Caleb said. "She's in Glenwood Springs. She runs a small sewing operation out of her home. Patterson says she remembers what happened with Hale, and she's willing to talk. He's bringing her. He's bringing her to Silver Creek. He sent the wire 4 hours ago. She agreed immediately. Patterson says." Caleb looked at the wire in his hand. "He says when he told her what was happening, she said, 'And I'm reading it exactly, tell that woman I've been waiting 3 years for someone to do something about this.'" The kitchen was quiet. Lillian put her hand on the back of a chair. She was not a woman who cried easily. She had not cried when she packed her belongings and left her old home. She had not cried at her first market Saturday in Silver Creek when 3 people laughed loud enough for her to hear. She had not cried when Victor Hale looked at her table with that slow, dismissive assessment and told her she should come work for him. She didn't cry now either, but she felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been braced for a long time, holding a position with the quiet exhaustion of a person who has been holding something alone, and that was now very slightly not alone anymore. "All right," she said. Her voice was steady. "Then we have everything we need. We might," Caleb said carefully. "But Lillian Hale is going to fight this hard. He's going to question Patterson's documents. He's going to say Ellen Marsh's situation was different, unrelated. He's going to use every lever he has on that committee to keep this from going the way we need it to go. I know, Bauer is still the question. I talked to him again yesterday. He wants to do the right thing. I believe that. But he's also afraid of what happens to his dairy operation if he crosses Hale publicly and then we lose." Lillian thought about that. She thought about fear. She had an intimate understanding of fear, not the sharp, immediate kind, but the low, grinding kind that comes from insecurity, from not knowing if the foundation you're standing on is solid enough to hold what you've built on top of it. She understood why Bauer was afraid. She didn't blame him for it. She also needed him. "I'll talk to him myself," she said. Caleb looked at her. "You? He needs to see me. Not you talking about me. Not Patterson's letters. Not Reverend Hartley's moral authority. He needs to look at the actual person and make the decision." She paused. "Can you take me out to his dairy this afternoon?" They went that afternoon. Bauer was a stocky, careful man in his 40s with the kind of hands that told his entire life story without him having to say a word. He met them in front of his operation with an expression that was painfully close to an apology, the expression of a man who already knew he was being asked to do something hard. "Miss Harper," he said. "Mr. Bauer." She didn't give him time to start hedging. "I know you're in a difficult position. I know you do business with Hale, and I know you're worried about what it costs you to go against him. I'm not going to pretend that isn't real." Bauer blinked. He had clearly expected something else: persuasion. Maybe, or emotion. "Not this directness. What I want to tell you," she continued, "is what I told Patterson, and Reverend Hartley, and anyone else who asked why they should believe me. I kept records from the day I arrived in Silver Creek. Every purchase, every sale, every correspondence. I have Patterson's certified copies of my father's original lending agreement. I have a woman who is traveling from Glenwood Springs tomorrow morning to tell a public hearing that Victor Hale did the same thing to her 3 years ago. I have arithmetic that any literate person in that room can check themselves. And the arithmetic says the number on that notice is not real." Bauer was quiet. "If we win tomorrow," she said, "and I believe we will, I want to talk to you about a partnership. Dairy goods at the Saturday market, butter, cream, fresh cheese, goods that bring new customers to both of our tables. Real customers, the kind that come back." She paused. "If we lose tomorrow, that conversation doesn't happen, but not because I didn't mean it. I'll mean it right up until the moment he takes my table, and I'll find another way to make it real somewhere else. Because that's what I do." Bauer looked at her for a long time. He looked at Caleb. Caleb said nothing because Caleb understood, with the instinctive intelligence she had come to rely on, that this moment did not need him. "My wife makes the best butter in this county," Bauer said at last. His voice was rough. "I know," Lillian said. "I've bought it twice." Something in his face moved. 2 o'clock tomorrow," he said. "I'll be there." They drove back towards Silver Creek as the afternoon was aging into early evening, the light coming flat and cold across the open land. Lillian sat in the wagon seat beside Caleb and said nothing for a long time, because there was nothing that needed saying right at that moment, and they had both learned, at different points in their lives and through different kinds of loss, that silence between people who trust each other is its own form of conversation. "Are you afraid?" he asked after a while. She considered the question honestly. "Of losing?" she said. "Yes. I'm afraid of what it costs if we lose. The work, the time, the people who put themselves out there to stand with me." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I'm not afraid of starting over. I've started over before. But I'd rather not." "We're not going to lose," he said. She looked at him. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, without performance, just the direct placement of a fact he believed. "You sound certain," she said. "I've been looking at the evidence for 2 weeks," he said. "I don't generally make confident statements about things I'm not confident about." A pause. "The arithmetic is on your side, and Ellen Marsh is coming from Glenwood Springs, which means she's spent 3 years waiting for this. You don't travel for a cause you're not sure of." Lillian looked back at the road. She thought about Ellen Marsh on a stagecoach, traveling towards Silver Creek with 3 years of waiting behind her and 1 afternoon of testimony ahead. She thought about Reverend Hartley with his 31 years of gospel and his building fund and his comfortable, difficult decision. She thought about Bauer and his wife's good butter and his rough voice saying 2 o'clock. She thought about Margaret Ells and Darrow at the post office and the young woman who had bought the blue apron and was wearing it now. She thought, "I did not come to Silver Creek to be rescued. I came here to build something, and what I built, without meaning to, without planning it, is a community of people who have a stake in whether I succeed. That is not rescue. That is something different and better. That is what happens when you treat people like they matter, and when you make things that are genuinely useful, and when you keep showing up regardless of who is laughing. That is the slow, patient construction of something that belongs to more than one person." Victor Hale had planned for every version of her except this one. He had planned for the woman who would fold and the woman who would fight alone, and the woman who would make noise and be dismissed. He had not planned for the woman who had quietly, and without drama, over 8 months of Saturday mornings and kitchen evenings and careful arithmetic, made herself matter to enough people that his plan had to contend with all of them. That was what tomorrow was, not a hearing, not a legal proceeding, an accounting of what she had actually built. She was going to walk into that room with Patterson's documents and Ellen Marsh and Reverend Hartley's moral weight and Bauer's wavering, courageous vote, and she was going to show Victor Hale exactly what he had underestimated. The wagon rolled into Silver Creek as the last light was flattening. "Thank you," she said to Caleb, "for all of it, Patterson. The documents, Bauer today." He didn't deflect it. He didn't say it was nothing, or it was no trouble. He said, "You've done the work. All of it. I knew where to look for the door handles." She stepped down from the wagon. She stood for a moment on the ground outside her house, and she felt the solid reality of it under her feet, the specific soil of a town that had laughed at her and was still, as far as anyone knew, expecting her to fail. "Get some sleep," Caleb said. "Tomorrow's going to be long." "I know," she said. She went inside. She did not sleep well, but she hadn't expected to. She lay in the dark and went through the numbers, one more time, every figure, every documented payment, every fee that had appeared from nowhere in that fraudulent notice. She went through the list of people who would be in that room. She went through the arguments Hale would make and the answers she had for each of them. And then, because there was nothing left to go through and no further preparation she could do, she made herself stop. She put her hand flat on the wall beside her bed, the way she sometimes put her hand flat on the blue cloth before the market opened. She thought tomorrow, she thought, "I'm ready." Outside, Silver Creek was quiet. The cold had settled in deep. Somewhere across town, Victor Hale was sleeping the sleep of a man who believed he had already won, because he had been winning for so long that the sensation of certainty and the sensation of victory had become indistinguishable to him. He did not know about Ellen Marsh. He did not know that Bauer had said 2 o'clock. He did not know, could not have imagined, the specific and formidable quality of the woman, lying awake in the dark, reviewing her numbers with calm precision, ready to walk into his hearing room at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, and dismantle every assumption he had made about what she was. The night held. Friday was coming. The morning stage was 40 minutes late. Lillian knew this because she had been standing near the depot since 9:15, and by 10:50 she had rearranged every thought in her head twice and worn a small groove in her patience that she was trying very hard not to let show on her face. Caleb stood beside her without comment, which was the right thing to do, and which she was grateful for, because any comment at that moment would have required her to respond to it, and she was using all of her available concentration to stay calm. Patterson stepped off the stage at 10:53. Behind him came a woman Lillian had never seen slight, somewhere in her mid-40s, with the careful, assembled composure of someone who had made a significant decision and had arrived at the far side of it where the anxiety transforms into something quieter and more determined. She carried a small traveling bag and a document case, and when Patterson turned to introduce her, she was already looking at Lillian with the specific recognition of someone who knows, without needing to be told, exactly who they have come to help. "Miss Harper," Patterson said, "this is Ellen Marsh." Ellen Marsh put out her hand, and Lillian took it. "Thank you for coming," Lillian said. "You have no idea," Ellen said, "how long I have wanted to do exactly this." Her voice was steady and her grip was firm. "Tell me what you need from me, and I'll give it to you." They had 3 hours. They used them, precisely. Patterson spread his documents on the table at Lillian's kitchen. That table had become the command center for a battle that Lillian had never intended to fight in public, but was going to fight as well as she possibly could, and he walked them through the hearing process. The committee would convene at 2 o'clock in the back room of the town hall, which had a long table and 6 chairs and approximately 30 additional chairs for observers. Committee hearings were open. Anyone could attend. The complaint would be read. The complainant Hale would present his case. The respondent Lillian would present hers. Committee members could ask questions. Then the committee would deliberate and vote. "What's the standard for the decision?" Lillian asked. "Preponderance of evidence," Patterson said. "Majority carries." "Which means we need Bauer." "He said he'll be there," Caleb said. "Saying and being are not the same thing," Patterson said. "Not unkindly. What I need you to understand is that if Bauer doesn't vote, or votes with Hale, I can challenge the decision through county court. But that takes months and costs money, and in the meantime your market lot can be suspended." Lillian absorbed this. "So everything is on Bauer." "Everything is on Bauer," Patterson confirmed. "Which is why I'd like to talk about your presentation. Not just the documents. How you present yourself matters in a room like that. With a man like Hale controlling the format." "How do I present myself?" she asked. "Exactly as you are," Patterson said, looking at her directly. "Not angry, not emotional, not performing anything. The moment you look afraid or defensive, Hale will use it. The moment you look rehearsed, people will wonder why. You go in there and you tell the truth, the way you've been telling it to me clearly. With evidence, without asking for anyone's sympathy." Ellen Marsh had been listening from the other side of the table. "He's going to try to rattle you," she said. "The moment he makes his presentation, he's going to say something that's designed to make you react. When he did it to me," she stopped briefly, started again. "When he did it to me, he said I had been conducting my operation without proper permits. It wasn't true, but I didn't have my permits with me in the room. I hadn't thought to bring them because I didn't know he'd say it." She looked at Lillian steadily. "Bring everything. Every paper you have. If he says something and you can counter it immediately, with a physical document you place on the table, it changes the room." Lillian thought of her ledger, her rental receipt, her correspondence, the certified documents Patterson had brought. "I have everything," she said. "Good," Ellen said. They ate a quick lunch that nobody was particularly interested in eating. Patterson reviewed his presentation once more. Ellen walked Lillian through the specifics of what had happened to her, the lease dispute that had turned out to be manufactured, the sudden appearance of a claims notice she hadn't been warned about, the committee hearing where Hale had sat across from her with that specific expression of comfortable authority and watched her have nothing sufficient to fight back with. She had closed her shop within a month. She had packed and left for Glenwood Springs and spent 6 months trying not to think about the hat she'd been working on when Hale walked in with his papers. The worst part, Ellen said, wasn't losing the shop. It was that nobody asked any questions. The town just watched it happen. People who had bought from me for 2 years just watched and said nothing. Lillian was quiet. "That's different this time," Caleb said, from his chair by the wall. Ellen looked at him. "She has people," he said simply. "That's the difference." At 1:30, they gathered everything and walked to the town hall. They walked through Silver Creek on a Friday afternoon in late October. 4 people with a document case and a combined weight of purpose that people seemed to sense rather than see, because the sidewalk seemed to quiet slightly as they passed. And Lillian noticed several people stop what they were doing and watch, with the specific attention that a town pays to something it understands, instinctively is about to matter. Margaret Els was already outside the town hall when they arrived. Beside her stood Reverend Hartley, upright and composed in his good coat. Darrow from the post office was there, and his wife, who was wearing the blue apron over her town coat without any apparent self-consciousness. The young woman who had bought the other apron was there too, standing a little apart with her husband, both of them looking as though they had come, because not coming had seemed worse. Lillian stopped when she saw them. She counted. 12 people. 14, if you counted the 2 cowhands she recognized from the supply end of the market who were leaning against the wall with the studied casualness of men trying not to appear as invested as they were. She had not asked any of them to be here. She turned to Caleb. He was looking at the group with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something between satisfaction and a feeling that didn't have a clean name, but that she recognized. because she had felt it herself on the Saturday when her table sold out for the first time. The specific sensation of something that was supposed to be impossible turning out to be merely difficult. "You could have told me," she said quietly. "You would have tried to talk them out of it," he said. "Said it was too much. They didn't need to. You didn't want to put anyone out." He looked at her with that level, direct gaze. "You were wrong, by the way. This is exactly what they needed to do." She looked at the 14 people standing outside the town hall on a Friday afternoon for her, and she felt the kind of thing she had been bracing against feeling for 8 months, because feeling it while she was still uncertain whether she would win seemed like a risk she couldn't afford. She felt that she was not alone. She walked into the town hall. The back room held more people than its 6 committee chairs suggested it should. By the time 2 o'clock arrived, every additional chair was filled, and people were standing along the walls, which Lillian observed with the careful peripheral vision she had been using for months to track focused entirely on her own table. Victor Hale was already seated at the committee table when they entered. He looked at Lillian when she came in with the flat assessment she knew well, and then his eyes moved to Patterson, and then to the woman behind Patterson, and she saw the exact moment he registered Ellen Marsh's presence. It was a small flicker, barely half a second, but she had been watching for it, and she caught it completely. His face returned to its composed authority almost instantly, but the flicker had happened, and she filed it carefully. He didn't know who Ellen was. Not yet. Rollins was already seated beside Hale. Bauer's chair was empty. The clock on the wall read 1:58. Lillian sat at the respondent's table. Patterson sat beside her. Caleb took a chair directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the specific steadiness of his presence without needing to look. 1:59. The door at the back of the room opened. Bauer walked in. He was wearing his better coat, the one that wasn't stained with work, and he had the careful, deliberate walk of a man who has made a hard decision and is now executing it before he can unmake it. He sat in the 3rd committee chair without looking at Hale, and Lillian saw the muscle in his jaw working, and she thought, "He's here, he's terrified, and he's here anyway." That is what courage actually looks like. And it is not a small thing. At 2 o'clock exactly, Hale called the hearing to order. He presented his complaint with the polished efficiency of a man who had rehearsed it, which he had. She could hear the rehearsal in the cadence, the way certain phrases landed with a weight that suggested they had been shaped for impact. He laid out the history of the debt attached to the Harper name. He presented a copy of the notice, the fraudulent notice, with its inflated numbers as supporting documentation. He described Lillian's operation in terms that stopped just short of illegal, using words like undisclosed and unresolved with the careful ambiguity of a man who understood exactly how much accusation he could embed in neutral language. He spoke for 11 minutes. When he finished, he looked at Lillian with the expression of a man who has placed all the pieces on the board and is waiting for the other player to understand they've already lost. Patterson stood. He had a particular way of standing, not imposing, not performing authority, just a man of a certain age and certain experience, taking up the space that was his by right. He placed the certified documents on the table in front of him. He placed them deliberately, one after another, so that the sound of each one landing was its own small statement. "The complaint before this committee," Patterson said, "rests entirely on a debt notice that does not reflect the original terms of the lending agreement it claims to represent." He opened the first document. "This is the certified copy of the original agreement between Harold Harper and the creditor, Edmund Chase, obtained from the Garfield County Recorder's Office. The interest rate specified in this agreement is 6%. Simple, annual. The notice presented by Mr. Hale applies a compounding rate of 14% and adds administrative fees totaling $93 that appear nowhere in the original agreement." He paused. The room was completely silent. "The actual remaining balance on this account," Patterson continued, "based on the original terms and the documented partial payments made before Harold Harper's death, is $187, not $480. 187. Miss Harper has been notified of a debt nearly 3 times larger than what she actually owes. He looked up at the committee. I would like to know who generated the version, Mr. Hale is presenting, and when and under whose authority the additional charges were added. Hale's expression had not changed. He was good. Lillian gave him that. He had the face control of a man who had prepared for adversity. The document I presented came from the creditor's representative, he said. I have no responsibility for how the creditor manages their accounts. How did you obtain this document? Patterson asked. Through standard inquiry. You made an inquiry to the creditor's representative about a private debt belonging to a private individual. Patterson's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. On what basis? What standing did you have to make that inquiry? A pause. It was a very short pause, but in a room that quiet. It was long enough. I was investigating the backgrounds of market vendors, Hale said. As a committee member, I have a responsibility for the integrity of. You are not a market inspector, Patterson said. You are a competitor. You share a market with Miss Harper, and you have solicited her to abandon her own operation and come work for yours. Which she declined. After she declined, you obtained private financial information about her and constructed a complaint using that information. He let that sit. This committee is being asked to adjudicate a dispute that is, in its substance, a business competitor's attempt to use a legal process to eliminate competition. That is not what this committee exists for. Hale leaned forward. Those are serious allegations. They are, Patterson agreed. Would you like to hear from someone who can speak to the pattern? And then he said, Miss Marsh. Ellen Marsh stood. There was a particular quality to the way the room received her, a shift. A collective recalibration, the sound of people who had been watching a proceeding, suddenly, understanding that they were watching something larger than a proceeding. She said her name. She said what her business had been in. She described in the clear, unhurried, precise language of a woman who had rehearsed this testimony only in her head for 3 years, and found that it came out perfectly formed anyway. Exactly what had happened to her in Silver Creek in 1884. The manufactured dispute. The notice that appeared from nowhere. The hearing where Hale had sat at the same committee table with the same composed authority. The store that closed. The space that Hale's operation moved into 2 months later. She said, I left because I didn't have what Miss Harper has. I didn't have the documents. I didn't have anyone who knew the law. I didn't have. She stopped. Her voice was still controlled. But something in it thinned slightly, and the room felt it. I didn't have people here. I should have fought. I have thought about that every week for 3 years. But I didn't have what she has, and I left, and I am here now, because I would like this committee to understand that what is happening to Miss Harper is not an isolated dispute. It is the second time this same man has used this same room to take something from a woman who wouldn't do what he wanted. The silence after she sat down was the loudest thing Lillian had heard since she arrived in Silver Creek. Hale said Miss Marsh's situation is entirely unrelated to Mr. Hale. Reverend Hartley's voice came from the observers section. And it had the particular quality that 31 years of Sunday mornings gives a man's voice, not loud. Not theatrical, simply impossible to talk over. With respect, you've had your presentation. Let the committee deliberate. Hale looked at Hartley. This was the moment she had identified, the moment where preventing a reverend from speaking in public would cost more than whatever was gained by silencing him. She had calculated it correctly. Hale said nothing. Rollins, beside him, was examining the documents Patterson had placed on the table with expression through several phases during Patterson's presentation, and had arrived somewhere uncomfortable. Rollins was a man who did business with Hale, yes, but he was also a man who had been sitting in a public room, watching the details of a fabricated debt note be enumerated to an audience that now included half the town and a visiting lawyer with certified county documents. The arithmetic of his own position was changing in real time. Bauer had not said anything. He had sat through the entire proceeding with his hands on the table in front of him and his face set in an expression of concentrated attention that told nothing about what was happening inside him. Hale called for deliberation. The three committee members stepped to the side of the room. Lillian watched without watching. She kept her face forward, her hands on the table, her posture the posture Patterson had said. Not afraid, not performing, but with the peripheral vision she had developed over eight months of surviving in rooms that weren't built for her. She tracked everything. Rollins was speaking. His body language had changed, the slight forward lean, the hands that had been folded and were now open on the table. He was not arguing for Hale. She could not hear the words, but she could read the posture, and the posture said, "This has gotten complicated." Bauer was speaking now. His voice was too low to hear, but his face was visible. And his face said the same thing his voice in front of his dairy had said the afternoon before, rough with the effort of something that was difficult but decided. Hale was speaking, and his posture had changed too. The comfortable authority was still there. He had too many years of it to lose it in a single afternoon, but it had a rigidity to it now. The kind that comes from holding a position under pressure rather than the kind that comes from natural ease. The deliberation took 9 minutes. Lillian counted them. They returned to the table. Rollins was the one who spoke. She hadn't expected that. "The committee has reviewed the complaint and the respondent's presentation," Rollins said. His voice was careful, the voice of a man who was being precise about something, because precision was the only protection he had left. "We find that the documentation presented by the respondent raises substantial questions about the basis of the complaint. The certified records from Garfield County indicate a discrepancy between the debt notice presented in this hearing and the original lending agreement." He paused. "We find insufficient grounds to take action against Miss Harper's market lot at this time. The complaint is denied." The room was very still for exactly 2 seconds. Then it was not still at all. Lillian heard Margaret Ells make a sound that was not quite a word. She heard the young woman with the apron say something to her husband. She heard the general shift of a room full of people processing an outcome that some of them had expected and some of them hadn't. She heard none of it clearly, because the ringing in her ears was too loud. She put both hands flat on the table in front of her and breathed. Patterson, beside her, was already gathering documents with the efficient calm of a man who has won a case and is already thinking about the next step. "It's not over," he said quietly. "He can appeal to county court." "I know," she said. "And the underlying debt is still real. $187. That needs to be addressed." "I know," she said. "I'll address it. I can help you structure a payment, Patterson." She looked at him. "Give me a moment." He gave her the moment. She looked at the room. She looked at the people who had come on a Friday afternoon and sat in chairs and listened, and by their presence alone shifted the weight of the room in a direction it might not otherwise have gone. She looked at Bauer, who was standing now, looking at the floor with the expression of a man who has done something hard and doesn't quite know what to do with how it feels. She looked at Reverend Hartley, who caught her eye and gave a small, precise nod of the kind that contains an entire sermon in a single gesture. She looked at Caleb. He was already looking at her. He had been looking at her, she thought, for the last 9 minutes while she was counting them. And the expression on his face was not triumphant, not the particular glow of someone who has won a fight. It was something quieter than that, something she had seen once before. In a different context, on a different face, the expression of someone who sees you, fully and without conditions, and is not surprised by what they find. Hale stood. He was the last person in the room to stand, and he did it with the deliberate pace of a man who refuses to be seen hurrying. He collected his papers. He adjusted his jacket. He looked at Lillian across the room, not at the table, not at Patterson, at her specifically, and his expression said something that his mouth was too practiced to say out loud. "This is not finished." She held his gaze. Her expression said, "I know. I'll be ready." Rollins left quickly behind him. The exit of a man trying to put distance between himself and a position he was no longer sure about. The room began to clear, in the slightly chaotic, relieved way that rooms clear after prolonged tension has been released. Ellen Marsh found her way to Lillian's side through the emptying chairs. "How do you feel?" Ellen asked. Honestly, Lillian said. Yes. Like I've been carrying something very heavy for 8 months, and someone just told me I can put it down. But my arms are still in the same position they were in. She looked at Ellen. Does that make sense? Ellen laughed a real laugh. Unguarded, the first fully unguarded thing Lillian had heard from her since she arrived on the stage. Yes, she said. That makes complete sense. Give it a day. Your arms will figure it out. They stood together for a moment in the emptying room. What will you do? Lillian asked. Go back to Glenwood Springs? Tomorrow, Ellen said. Patterson has some things he wants me to look at while I'm here. Documents he thinks might support a broader challenge to what Hale did in my case. She paused. It's 3 years late, but apparently not too late. No, Lillian said. Apparently not. Caleb waited until the room was nearly empty before he came to her. He moved with the same unhurried economy she had noticed from the first morning, nothing performed. Nothing wasted, and he stopped a short distance away. The way he always stopped, leaving her the space to decide what the distance between them was. Well done, he said. Patterson did the work, she said. Patterson did the legal work, he said. You did everything that makes legal work matter. She looked at him. He was close enough that she could see the specific quality of his attention, the way he was completely present, in a way that a lot of people weren't even when they were standing directly in front of you. Can I ask you something, she said. Yes. That morning, she said. The very first morning. You came to the east end of the market because you heard the laughing and you wanted to see what it was about. She paused. What did you think you were going to find? He considered this. Someone who needed something, he said. I wasn't sure what. I don't always know why I go toward things. I've spent 8 years going away from things. And I'm tired of it. The room was almost empty now. Patterson was at the far end, talking to Reverend Hartley in what appeared to be a productive conversation about legal process and moral authority. Margaret Ells was near the door helping Ellen Marsh with her traveling bag. The clock on the wall said 2:47. The debt, Lillian said. The real one. Patterson says he can help me structure a payment plan. That's good. $187. She said it the way she said all her numbers plainly. Because numbers were facts, and facts were the foundation she built on. I can manage that. It'll take time, but I can manage it. I know you can, he said. And again, no flourish, no reassurance performed for her benefit. Just a man stating something he considered factually true. She thought about what he had said in the wagon the evening before. I just knew where to look for the door handles. She thought about Clara, whose name she had never mentioned to him again, because she understood that it was not a thing he had shared to be discussed, but a thing he had shared, because it was the true answer to a question she had asked. And the truth sometimes lives in rooms that are only opened once. She thought about 12 miles east, about a ranch with 6 empty mason jars and a barn roof that had needed patching before winter. When Patterson is done with the paperwork, she said, I need to think about next Saturday's market. You do, he said. The table will be full, she said. I've been building inventory all week. I know. I saw the light in your kitchen at 11 o'clock on Tuesday when I was riding in for the supply wagon. She looked at him. You saw my kitchen light at 11 o'clock. I was passing, he said. And something in his expression was the closest thing to self-conscious she had ever seen from him, which on his face read as a slight shift in the angle of his jaw. The road passes near the south side of town. The supply wagons come in from the east, she said. A pause. They do. She held the moment carefully. The way she held good things, not gripping, because gripping was how you crushed them, but present with the full weight of her attention. Come to the market on Saturday, she said. I'll have the plum preserves. I'll be there, he said. And after, she said, if you're not doing anything pressing. I've been thinking about that dairy partnership with Bauer, and I could use a second opinion on how to structure the terms. I have some thoughts on that, he said. I imagined you might. She picked up her document case. She straightened her coat. She walked out of the Silver Creek Town Hall on a Friday afternoon in late October into the cooling air of a Colorado autumn. And the town looked the same as it always looked, the same buildings and the same street and the same people moving through their same lives. And yet the specific quality of the world she was stepping into was not the same at all. And she felt it the way you feel a change in weather. Not because you can see the clouds, but because the air itself has shifted, and your body knows before your mind has finished the argument. Behind her, she heard Caleb's boots on the wooden steps. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She already knew he was there. The Saturday after the hearing, Lillian arrived at the market at 5:58 in the morning, 2 minutes earlier than usual. She noticed this and did not try to explain it to herself. Some things were simply true. She spread the blue cloth across the table. The same cloth, the same worn softness under her palms. The same faded color that had started as deep blue and become something more honest over time. She had been offered a new cloth twice in the past month, once by Margaret Ells, who had good intentions, and once by the woman at the dry goods store, who had started speaking to her with the particular warmth people adopt when they realize they have been wrong about someone and are not quite ready to say so directly. Lillian had declined both times. The blue cloth stayed. She began arranging her table. 12 jars of preserves. 4 varieties. The plum batch she had promised Caleb. 3 loaves of bread. 4 aprons, including one she had finished by lamplight on Thursday evening. The stitching on the collar, taking 3 attempts before she was satisfied with it. The herb bundles. And in the center of the table, in the space she had cleared specifically for it, a small handwritten card that said, "Ask me about the Winter Market Partnership. Bowers Dairy and Harper's Provisions. Coming December." She stepped back and looked at the table. It was the fullest it had ever been. She was not done. By 7:15, Caleb Morgan rode into Silver Creek from the East Road and tied his horse at the post near the supply wagons. He walked the length of the market to her table, with a brown paper parcel under his arm, which he set on the edge of the table, without explanation, and said, good morning," she said. "What's in the parcel?" 6 more jars, he said. "I found them in the back of the storage room last week. Thought you could use them before the winter batches." She picked up one of the jars and turned it in her hand. Clean, good glass, the kind that sealed properly. Each one was money she didn't have to spend. Each one was another batch she could make. "Thank you," she said. He said, "The plum preserves ready right there." She pointed. He picked up a jar and looked at the color, through the glass, that dark, concentrated purple red of late-season plums cooked down to their best version of themselves, and he nodded with the same deliberate approval he had given everything she'd made, which was the approval she valued, precisely because it was never automatic. "I'll take 2, he said. "You always take 2. They're always worth taking 2 of," she smiled. She had been doing that more smiling without planning it, without the half-second lag of a woman checking whether the expression was safe. It was a change she noticed the way she noticed all changes, precisely without sentiment, as a data point about where she was now versus where she had been. The market opened fully at 7:30, and what happened next was something Lillian had not predicted, which was notable because she predicted most things. People came to her table first, not drifting by, not stopping on their way to somewhere else. Coming directly, deliberately, with the specific intentionality of people who have decided where they are going before they leave the house. Margaret Ells with her daughter, who Lillian had never met before, who was 16, and looked at the aprons with the same focused interest her mother had never quite managed to suppress. Reverend Hartley, who purchased a jar of apple butter and paid for it without any of the careful avoidance he'd practiced for the first 6 months of her market presence. Darrow from the post office with his wife, who was wearing the blue apron again, and who said without preamble, "I need another one of these for my sister in Aspen." "Can you do one in green?" "I can do one in green," Lillian said. Bauer came at 8 o'clock with his wife, a small woman named Ruth, who had the energy of someone who has been waiting for an occasion and has decided this is it. Ruth Bauer shook Lillian's hand and said, "I heard about what happened at the hearing. I want you to know that my husband talked about it for 2 days straight, and I have never been more proud of him in 22 years of marriage." Bauer, standing behind his wife, turned a color that had nothing to do with the cold air. "Mrs. Lillian said your butter is going to be the best thing at this market by December. I need you to know I believe that completely." Ruth Bauer looked at her with the expression of someone receiving a specific, practical form of respect that they have not often been offered, and said, "You come out to the dairy this week. I'll show you the whole operation. We'll talk about what works." "Tuesday," Lillian said. "Tuesday," Ruth confirmed. After they'd on, Caleb, who had been standing at his usual position, slightly off to the side of her table, said quietly, "You just made a friend." "I made a business partner," Lillian said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "I'm learning that they're not." By 9 o'clock, the thing she had not predicted was in full evidence. The market had reorganized itself, not dramatically. Not in any way that anyone would have named or pointed to, but in the way that markets reorganize when the weight of attention shifts. People moved differently through the space. The cluster of activity that had always centered on Gerald Pittman's overflowing stall now distributed more evenly, with a significant current moving toward the east end where her table stood. Gerald Pittman watched this with an expression that had completed its evolution. It was no longer amusement, or calculation, or the dismissive headshake she had catalogued from 8 months ago. It was the expression of a man revising a conclusion he'd been confident about, which was not a comfortable expression to wear, but was at least an honest one. At 9:15 he walked over. Lillian had served 3 customers in the last 7 minutes, and her supply of herb bundles was down to 2. She looked up when Pittman stopped at her table. "Miss Harper," he said. "Mr. Pittman." He looked at her table, really looked at it, the way she had always wanted people to look at it, not for evidence of failure, not for confirmation of what they'd already decided, but with actual eyes. "The preserves," he said. "Are you taking orders?" "For specific quantities." She felt something move through her that she kept completely off her face. "I am," she said. "For regular orders I can work out a schedule." "What are you thinking?" "I've had 3 customers in the last 2 weeks ask me if I carry homemade preserves," he said. "I don't." "You apparently do." He looked at her with the blunt directness of a man who has decided to be straightforward because the alternative has started costing him money. "I'm not talking about what Hale proposed. I'm talking about a straight supply arrangement. You make, I sell. You name your wholesale price, and we agree on a margin. No strings." Lillian looked at him. She thought about the morning 8 months ago when she had placed her first jars on this table and Gerald Pittman had caught her eye from across the market and shaken his head. She thought about every Saturday between then and now. She thought about the careful, grinding patience of a person who keeps showing up when showing up is the only argument she has left to make. "I'll need to think about the numbers," she said. "Come back next week with what margin you're expecting, and I'll tell you whether I can make it work." "Fair enough," he said. He went back to his stall. Caleb said nothing. She said nothing. But when she finally looked at him, the expression on his face was the one she had come to recognize as his particular form of satisfaction, not triumphant, not performed, just the quiet acknowledgement of a man watching something unfold exactly as it should. At 10 o'clock, Victor Hale came to the market. She knew he would. She had known since Friday afternoon that he would not simply disappear. Men like Victor Hale did not disappear. They recalibrated. They waited. They looked for the next angle. She had not told anyone she expected him, because telling people would have made it into an event, and she needed it to be something she handled as a matter of ordinary business rather than a confrontation. He didn't come to her table. He walked the market with the composed ease he always wore, speaking to people, stopping at stalls, operating within his normal pattern. He looked at her table from across the market with an expression she read precisely. He was assessing the crowd around it, counting the transactions, recalculating. Then he walked toward her. The crowd around her table had thinned momentarily, a brief gap between customers, the kind of natural lull that happens every 20 minutes or so. She was straightening jars that didn't need straightening, which was a habit she had identified and accepted as her specific version of composure under pressure. He stopped at the edge of the table. "Miss Harper," he said. "Mr. Hale," she said. The table was between them. The blue cloth was between them. 8 months of Saturday mornings were between them. And the hearing room on Friday afternoon. And Patterson's certified documents. And Ellen Marsh's 3-year journey from Glenwood Springs and back. "I want you to know," he said, "that I intend to file an appeal with the county court." "I assumed you would," she said. "The committee decision doesn't resolve the underlying debt. The underlying debt is $187, she said. "I'm aware of the amount. I'm addressing it." He looked at her with a new quality of attention, not the dismissive assessment of 8 months ago, not the comfortable authority of the hearing room. Something more careful. She was becoming, she understood, someone he had to think about rather than simply remove. And that recalibration was visible in the way he looked at her now. "You've had help," he said. "Yes," she said simply. "I have." "Morgan's help." He said Caleb's name with a faint inflection that was trying to be dismissive and not quite reaching it. "Patterson's help," she said. "Ellen Marsh's help. Margaret L's. Reverend Hartley. Bauer and his wife Ruth, who makes the finest butter I've tasted in Colorado, and will be at this market by December." She held his gaze. "And yes, Mr. Morgan's help, among others." Hale looked at her for a long moment. She let him look. "The appeal is within my rights," he said. "Absolutely," she said. "Patterson will respond. The certified documents will be presented again. The same arithmetic that applied on Friday will apply in county court." She picked up a jar of plum preserves and placed it on the counter between them. "Would you like to buy something while you're here? The plum is very good this year." He looked at the jar. He looked at her. He left without another word. Lillian set the jar back in its place. Her hands were completely steady. Behind her, she heard Caleb release a breath that was not quite a laugh but was related to one. She turned and found him with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that was as close to open as she had seen it. "Plum preserves," he said. "It seemed appropriate," she said. "It was perfect," he said. And something in the way he said it, not the compliment itself, but the specific warmth underneath it, the way it came from somewhere unguarded and didn't try to hide that, made her look at him differently than she had been looking at him for the last 2 months. Or perhaps she had been looking at him this way for a while, and was only now permitting herself to acknowledge it. She thought of 11 o'clock on a Tuesday, the kitchen light. The road that passed near the south side of town, which was not where the supply wagons came from. She thought, "He has been finding reasons to come to Silver Creek on days that aren't Saturday for longer than I realized." She thought, "So have I, for reasons that have nothing to do with the market." She said nothing about this yet. There was a right time for things. And this was not it, and she had a table full of goods and 4 more customers already approaching from the direction of the post office. She served them. The market ran until 2 in the afternoon. And by the time it wound down, Lillian's table held 4 jars of preserves, 1 loaf of bread, and the herb bundles that had not sold. And everything else was gone. She had taken 2 orders for custom aprons and 1 order from a family heading west who wanted 6 jars of mixed preserves ready by the following Friday for their trail provisions. She stood at the blue cloth table and looked at what was left. She thought, "This time last year, I arrived in Silver Creek with 3 bags and a recipe box and the specific kind of determination that grows in a person who has already lost almost everything." She thought, "I have not lost anything more. In fact, she folded the blue cloth with the same care she always used. Caleb was helping her carry her emskit he asked to the wagon she had borrowed from Margaret's husband for the larger market days. And they were working in the comfortable, task-organized silence they had developed over months of proximity. When he said, "I want to show you something at the ranch," she looked at him. "What kind of something?" "The kind that requires you to come outside," he said. "Not a description." She considered this for a moment. Whenever you have time." She thought about her schedule. Tuesday with Ruth Bauer at the dairy. Wednesday she needed to start the winter batches. Thursday she had promised Patterson a written account of her ledger for the county court file. Sunday, she said. "Sunday works," he said. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration. But his jaw had the slight shift that she had learned to read. The one that on any other face would have been a smile, and on his was something quieter and more genuine. Sunday came with a cold, clear quality that Colorado autumn produced at its best, the air sharp enough to feel alive in. The sky the particular blue that only happens when everything that isn't essential has been stripped back to the bone. Lillian rode out to the ranch with the practical attention of a woman who had never been there before and was applying her full assessment capacity to what she was seeing. 12 miles east was not a long journey, but it was a different world from Silver Creek in the small ways that rural distance creates quieter. More settled, the kind of quiet that isn't absence but fullness. The way a room that belongs to someone feels different from a room that doesn't. Caleb met her at the gate. He showed her the barn first, the roof he had mentioned months ago. Patched now and solid, the repair work clean and functional, in the way everything about his operation was clean and functional. Nothing performed for appearance, everything built to last. He showed her the stores he was laying in for winter. He showed her the root cellar with its organization that reflected a mind that thought in systems, that understood the relationship between autumn work and winter survival in the particular way of someone who had been doing this alone for a long time and had made his peace with the discipline it required. Then he showed her the table. It was in the main room of the house, a long table. Solid wood, the kind of table that had been built to seat more people than currently sat at it. On it were spread the remains of a working morning. Papers, a map, a coffee cup. The house had the organized sparseness of a man who had simplified everything down to what he actually used. It was clean. It was quiet. It had a particular quality of waiting that she noticed without letting herself interpret it too directly. Clara used to talk about a garden, he said. He said it without preliminary, the way he sometimes said things that had been held for a while and were ready to come out. Out behind the house, she had a whole plan for it. Vegetables, herbs, some flowers she liked. She never got to do it. The sickness came before the ground was ready. He paused. I've been looking at that patch of ground for 8 years. I've never planted anything in it. I couldn't figure out what to plant. Lillian was very still. But I've been thinking, he said. Herbs. The kind you use for your bundles. Thyme, rosemary, sage. Maybe some berry canes if the ground's right for it. He looked at her directly. I thought maybe you'd know what would take. She looked at him. She understood what he was saying. Not just about the garden. She understood the full weight of it, what it cost him to stand in that room and say those words. What 8 years of organized sparseness meant. What it meant to take a patch of ground that had been held empty out of grief and ask what should be planted in it. Rosemary is hardy, she said. Her voice was even. It'll come back every year once it's established. Thyme does well in this elevation. Sage needs good drainage. I'd need to see the ground. She paused. Berry canes are a 3-year investment before you get a real yield. But the yield is worth it. I know how to wait, he said. I know you do, she said. The silence between them was the specific kind she had come to understand as its own form of conversation, not empty. Not uncomfortable. Not the silence of two people who don't know what to say, but the silence of two people who know exactly what is being said and are allowing it to be said at its own pace. I should tell you something, Caleb said. All right. I've been coming into Silver Creek on days that aren't Saturday, he said. For the last 2 months. I've been finding reasons. Supply runs that I could have consolidated, a piece of equipment that needed to be looked at, a conversation with Patterson that could have been a letter. He looked at her with the direct, undecorated honesty that was the most consistent thing about him. I don't want to find reasons anymore. I'd rather just tell you directly that I want to come into town and ask if that's all right. Lillian looked at Caleb Morgan. She thought about the morning she had first seen him, a man who moved with the economy of someone who had been covering distances alone, who had heard the laughing and walked toward it instead of past it, who had looked at her table and seen what was actually there rather than what everyone else had decided was there. She thought about what he had said months ago, standing in her kitchen after Patterson left. I know what it looks like when a person is building something out of what's left. She thought he was talking about both of us. It's all right, she said. It's more than all right. Something in his face changed, a specific, quiet change. The kind that happens when a person has been holding something carefully for a long time and is finally allowed to put it down gently rather than drop it. Good, he said. And then after a moment, the coffee's still hot. If you want some. I want some, she said. They sat at the long table, the table that was built for more people than had been sitting at it, and they drank coffee and talked about the herb garden and the berry canes and the county court appeal and the winter market partnership with the Bowers. And the conversation moved the way good conversations move between people who have already done the hard work of understanding each other, which is to say it moved naturally, without effort, without the performance that happens between people who are still deciding whether to trust. 3 weeks later, Patterson received word from the county court. Hale had filed his appeal. The hearing was scheduled for December. Lillian read the notice at her kitchen table and felt the cold weight of it settle in her chest, because she was honest with herself about what things cost. And she was honest with herself now. This was going to be harder than Friday. County court meant a judge, a formal record, a proceeding that carried the weight of legal consequence in both directions. It meant more of Patterson's time and her money. It meant a longer fight than she had hoped. She put the notice down. She opened her ledger. She began calculating. Caleb came by that afternoon, not for any reason she had requested, but because Sunday at the ranch had established a new understanding between them that didn't require reasons, and because he seemed to have a particular instinct for the moments when she was sitting at her kitchen table working through something difficult and could use the specific quality of his presence rather than his absence. She showed him the notice without preamble. He read it, set it down, picked up her coffee to refill it from the pot on the stove, which he had learned the location of 3 weeks ago and since treated as common knowledge. December is 6 weeks away, he said. Yes, Patterson will be ready. I know Ellen Marsh said she'd come back if we needed her, he said. She said it specifically. I wrote it down. Lillian looked at him. When did you talk to Ellen Marsh? I've been in correspondence with her, he said, with the slight jaw shift that was his version of sheepish. Patterson introduced us at the hearing. She has information about Hale that she didn't present on Friday because we didn't need all of it. She's been building her own case, with Patterson's help, for the appeal she's going to file in Garfield County. He looked at Lillian directly. By December, the Garfield County Court is also going to have a file on Victor Hale. Our case and her case in 2 separate counties, both with certified documentation, both argued by the same lawyer, both on the record in the same 60-day window. Lillian stared at him. You've been coordinating this, she said. Patterson has been coordinating it, he said. I've been facilitating the correspondence. Since when? Since the morning after the Friday hearing, he said. I rode to Glenwood Springs on Saturday. Don't tell me you're surprised. You would have done exactly the same thing if you'd thought of it first. She sat back in her chair. She thought, he is absolutely right. I would have done exactly the same thing. She thought, this man is 12 miles east, and I have been thinking about that distance differently since Sunday, and everything he does confirms that the distance is wrong and should be changed. She thought, but that is a conversation for after December. Tell Patterson, she said, that I want to see the full strategy before we go into that courtroom. Every document, every argument, every witness. I want to know everything he's planning. He expected you to say that, Caleb said. He said he'll be here Thursday. December came the way Colorado winter came with authority, without apology. The days shortened, and the cold settled in, and the Saturday market moved to a reduced winter schedule. But Lillian's operation did not reduce. It shifted. The partnership with Bauer was officially announced the first Saturday of December, with a handwritten sign on a table that now held both preserves and dairy goods, Ruth Bauer's butter, and a soft, fresh cheese she made in small batches that sold out within an hour of the first market. Ruth said, "We're going to need to make 3 times as much next week." Lillian said, I'll increase the preserves. Can you increase the cheese? I can increase everything, Ruth said, with the expression of a woman whose capabilities have been underestimated for a long time and who is finding the experience of being accurately estimated to be extraordinarily satisfying. The county court hearing was on December 9th. It was a harder room than the committee room, higher ceiling. More formal record. A judge who was known in the region for the specific quality of impartiality that comes from having heard too many cases to be impressed by posturing in either direction. Hale had hired a lawyer. Patterson had expected this and had prepared accordingly. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Lillian sat through all of it with her hands on the table and her posture exactly as Patterson had instructed both times. Not afraid, not performing, not asking for sympathy. Just present, with evidence, with the particular steadiness of a person whose arithmetic has been checked from every angle and found correct. Ellen Marsh testified again. She was more composed this time, not because she had been less composed on Friday, but because 4 additional weeks of being listened to and believed had done something to the way she held herself. Some internal recalibration that Lillian recognized because she had been going through the same process herself. Patterson presented the Garfield County records. He presented Lillian's ledger, which the judge reviewed with an attention that felt, for the first time in Lillian's experience of official rooms, like genuine engagement with what was in it. He presented the discrepancy analysis. He presented the timeline of Hale's pattern, the offer, the waiting, the complaint, the manufactured urgency, the appeal, and laid it out with the clean logic of a man who has been assembling an argument for 2 months and has every piece in exactly the right place. Hale's lawyer argued the numbers. He was good. He was not as good as Patterson, but he was good, and the 4 hours were genuinely 4 hours of contested argument rather than a foregone conclusion, which meant, when the judge finally spoke, the room's attention had the specific weight of people who had been uncertain and were now going to be resolved. The judge found for Lillian on every contested point. He found the notice fraudulent. He found the appeal without merit. He ordered the original debt balance of $187 to be the only amount owed, with a structured payment schedule accommodated within her means. He made a notation in the official record about the pattern of conduct that Patterson had documented and indicated that he was forwarding the record to the district attorney for review. The last part was not something Patterson had promised. It was not something Lillian had allowed herself to expect. She sat at the respondent's table and heard the judge say the words district attorney and felt something move through her that she had no prepared response to. Because she had been preparing for a dozen outcomes, this particular one complete, documented, official, with consequences that extended beyond her table and her blue cloth, and her debt was not one she had dared to construct in advance. Caleb's hand found hers under the table. She hadn't looked at him. She hadn't been able to look away from the judge, but his hand was there, solid and warm and completely certain of itself, and she held it with the full grip of a woman who had been holding herself together with both hands for a very long time and was finally allowed to hold on to something else. After it was over, after the room had cleared, and Patterson had shaken hands with the judge's clerk and gathered his documents with the satisfied efficiency of a man who has won the fight he spent 2 months preparing for, Caleb walked her out of the courthouse into the cold December air. She stopped on the steps. She looked at Silver Creek in the winter light, the street, the buildings, the market square where her table stood even on the days she wasn't at it, because Bauer had built a small temporary shelter to keep the goods protected between Saturdays. The town that had laughed at a woman with an empty stall. The town where she had arrived with 3 bags and a recipe box and the determination of a person who had nothing left to lose and had decided to treat that as a freedom rather than a defeat. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "I'm thinking about next Saturday," she said. "I need to make a new batch of plum preserves. The last of the plums came in from the Hendersons' farm on Monday, and if I don't process them this week, they'll be past it." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not what you're thinking," he said. She looked at him. She thought, He has known me for 3 months and he already knows the difference between what I say and what I'm thinking. And he asks anyway, not to catch me out but because he actually wants to know. I'm thinking, she said, that I came here with nothing, and I have built something real. Not because someone rescued me, not because someone took pity on me. Because I kept showing up, and I made things that were worth making. And I treated people like they mattered, and eventually that was enough. She paused. And I'm thinking that, the thing I didn't expect, the thing nobody told me would happen, is that somewhere in the middle of all of it, I stopped being alone. He looked at her with that open, unguarded expression she had seen on his face only a handful of times. The expression that meant the composure had come down, and what was underneath it was simple and true. You're not alone, he said. You haven't been for a while now, I know, she said. I'm starting to let myself believe it. They stood together on the courthouse steps in the December cold of Silver Creek, Colorado, two people who had arrived at the same place from different directions, and by different kinds of loss, and who had found, in the improbable geography of a Saturday market and a blue cloth table, and a first question asked without laughing, something neither of them had been looking for, because neither of them had believed they were still the kind of people things like this happened to. The winter market partnership with the Bowers became one of the most talked about developments in Silver Creek that season. Ruth Bowers' cheese and Lillian's preserve together created a combination that people came specifically for, from the town and from outlying farms, and eventually from 3 other communities that had heard about it through the particular informal network by which good things travel in rural Colorado. By February, Lillian had taken on 2 women from town to help with production women who needed work and who she paid fairly and trained carefully, the way her mother had trained her, with the understanding that skill freely given is the most durable investment a person can make. Ellen Marsh received her own resolution from the Garfield County Court in January. Patterson argued it. She wrote to Lillian afterward, clear and warm, ending with, I should have fought 3 years ago. Thank you for showing me that it was still possible to fight. Victor Hale did not return to the Saturday market after December. His stores continued to operate in Silver Creek. Men like Hale had enough capital to absorb a legal loss without losing their commercial foothold, but the specific quality of authority he had moved through the town with was different now. The way a room is different after a window is opened. People still did business with him, but they did it with their eyes open. And open eyes changed the quality of every transaction they're part of. Caleb Morgan's ranch began producing something it hadn't produced in 8 years. Evidence of a life being lived rather than managed. The herb garden went in the following spring: rosemary along the south-facing wall for the drainage, thyme in the main bed, sage in the corner where the ground was best. The berry canes went in, along the fence line, with the 3-year patience of a man who understood that the best things required the kind of commitment that looked like faith from the outside. He asked her on a Saturday evening in March, with spring just beginning to suggest itself in the quality of the evening air, and the herb canes already showing the first tentative green of new growth. He asked the way he did everything directly, without performance, with the specific honesty of a person who has stopped finding reasons to delay the truth. She said yes the same way. They were married in May, in the church where Reverend Hartley had been preaching for 31 years and was going to preach for 12 more. Margaret Ells organized the reception with the decisive efficiency of a woman who has been waiting for an occasion worthy of her talents. Ruth Bauer brought butter and cheese. Lillian made 4 kinds of preserves. The blue cloth was on the table, not as decoration. It was covering the table where the food was laid out, because it was the right size for that table, and because it had been washed soft by years of use, and it was still the color of a winter sky, and it was hers. And it was going to stay hers. People told the story for years afterward. About the woman with the empty stall and the quiet cowboy who had heard the laughing and walked toward it instead of past it. About the documents and the hearing and the judge's notation that had eventually resulted in consequences for Victor Hale that extended well beyond Silver Creek. About the winter market partnership and the herb garden and the berry canes that produced their first real yield in the third year, exactly as promised. But the story that mattered, the one that Lillian would have told if anyone had ever asked her directly what it had all been about, was simpler than the legal proceedings and quieter than the market victories. It was about a woman who kept showing up, not because she was sure she would win, but because she had decided that the thing she was building was worth building whether it won or not. And about a man who recognized that quality in her before she fully recognized it in herself, and who chose every day to build something beside her rather than simply watch from a safe distance. What they built together lasted, not because it was perfect, and not because it was easy, but because it was made from the right materials: honesty, patience, the willingness to do the hard work without demanding that the hard work be noticed, and because both of them understood, from long and different experience with loss, that the things worth having are the things worth staying for. The stall that the town laughed at became a business that supported 6 families. The lonely cowboy who came to town for supplies found something that made the 12 miles home feel, for the first time in 8 years, like a direction worth riding toward. And the woman who had arrived in Silver Creek with nothing but a recipe box and a refusal to give up became exactly what she had always intended to become: not a person who was rescued, not a person who was pitied, but a person who had built something real with her own hands and her own mind and her own stubborn, patient, magnificent will. That was always going to be enough. It turned out to be more.